Hello, welcome to a lecture about how to use AI in your creative practice as an academic or a professional. I have developed this in my research as a lecturer because I've had a lot of students say to me that they were interested in knowing what the boundaries of their application of AI were and what we would recommend, how to learn how to prompt and things like that. So I'm hoping that this will be useful for staff just as much as it will be useful for students. So what is the current landscape of AI? So AI as we know it today isn't actually what it proclaims to be. We all know that the acronym is short for artificial intelligence, but that's pretty much marketing. Despite what's advertised to you, AI is not thinking for itself. If it was, this would be AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, where you're making an actual intelligent being that's having a thought process. But actually what's happening here is it's making connections between your query and an existing data set, a little bit like a search engine. So most tools that we understand to be AI are actually LLMs, which is a large language model. So things like ChatGPT, these are all LLMs. And they're huge data sets that recognize and understand responses in human-grade language. So we think it's a being that's thinking, but actually what it's doing is making estimates and guesses based on the information you're giving it. So here's a few examples of things that are out there. We've got OpenAI's ChatGPT, we've got Google's Gemini, we've got Midjourney, Claude, Perplexity, Copilot. Now Copilot's probably the one that staff members might be more aware of because that's Microsoft's built-in version, and ChatGPT seems to be sort of the stalwart for the students, the ones that most people are aware of. They all have different functionalities, they all do different things, but it's worth knowing that there's not just one you can go with, there's multiples out there. So within the space of about 5 years, we've gone from AI being simple tools for niche audiences to mass adoption. I bump into people all the time that have ChatGPT as an app on their phone, and that's a huge difference from what we saw a few years ago. So much like Moore's law, which says every 2 years the complexity of a chip in a computer will double, and that has been true for the past 20 years, we're seeing AI develop in this same way. It's very much following that pattern of every 2 years it's doubling in its complexity, and there's no reason why that's going to change because there's so much money being invested in it at the moment. So this increase in awareness and popularity has started to generate this sort of buzz around it. So it's really important that we know how to prompt, how to process and understand these tools at student and staff level. So hopefully this is what this presentation, this lecture is going to give you. So here's something worth looking at. I was talking about Moore's law and how it's changing in that complexity every 2 years. So Midjourney is one of the softwares I spoke about, and it's designed just to generate imagery. So you can see on the left there, Midjourney V2 in 2022 was generating these sort of abstract, almost art-like pieces, whereas in 2024, the V6 of it has made a much more realistic image. Now, it's still got a fantasy element to it, but that's because of the way that the prompt is guiding it forwards. Here's another one. If we look at the one on the left, which is from 2022, it almost feels like abstract photography. It's close to life, but it's not quite. But if we look on the right-hand side, it's super detailed, and it's because the data sets they're pulling from are these images that artists have made of digital artworks of crazy scenes, and it links back to that detailed prompt you can see below. So I think the first thing to say is AI is not the solution to your best work. It is merely a tool you can use. That instant feedback and production of material may feel really impressive, but it's actually just one of the tools in your armour. It's no more useful than a pencil. If you think about how much stuff you can achieve with a pencil, you can take notes, you can draw, you can make sketches. That's exactly what AI is. Just because it's powerful, it doesn't mean it's the ultimate for you here. So, leagues and leagues of creatives in lots of different genres have created so much work, which is brilliant, brilliant work, not only before AI, but potentially before computers. If you look at the photos of Ansel Adams' photography of the Yosemite Valley, I don't think anyone's ever taken a better photo of it since, and that was taken in the early 1900s. So there's no need to assume that AI is there to create your best work. It can help speed up and align your practice with ease, but there should be oversight into how much you trust it within your process. So I've made this sort of, I'm going to say, slightly naive Venn diagram. So we've got creative practice, we've got experimentation and development, we've got tools, and we've got time. And right in the middle there, where they all intersect, is great work. And if you look for the red dot, that's where artificial intelligence comes in for my practice. And it's probably where I think it'll come in for yours. So don't think that it has to be this big rung because you're feeling left behind and everyone's talking about it. I think actually it's a very small part of the process that could actually help you achieve really good work, but it's important to know where you can use it and what things you should be aware of whilst using it. So think about it as ingredients, because a lot of people are like, well, how do I use it? What's the best way to do it? If we were going to make a cake, we'd need to make sure we have the right ingredients. If we left flour out, it wouldn't work very well, would it? So we sort of approach it like a search engine because that's what we know of these things. We say, how do I do this? Which is exactly how people use Google. So the ingredients for our case here are context, language, information, and output. We need to give it a context as to what we need. We need to give it the right language. That's written language, as in English, but also it's about, I need this to be smart, I need this to be silly, I need this to be pithy, I need this to be fun. You've got to give it that context. Information, where's it going to draw its information from? Do you need to provide different information? And what output should it be? Is it going to be an image? Is it going to be text? And think about what that output is and how much you trust it, how much you want to take away from that. So here is a really good example. So on the left-hand side, we have the legend of American illustration, which is Norman Rockwell, which is 2 children eating corn. And on the right-hand side is a Stable Diffusion. That's a model of AI generation for image generation. And the prompt was children eating cake by Norman Rockwell. You'll see at the image on the right-hand side, which is figure 5, that it does understand the colour palettes and the compositions that Norman Rockwell's illustrations follow. But if you look at the characters on the left-hand side and the actual Norman Rockwell image, the young boy is eating lots of corn and he's very viciously going at the next one, whereas the woman, the young teenager, is a lot more slow and she's appreciating it. There's an understanding not only in illustration but human. There's an understanding of how to communicate with the image. It's very surface level that we get from the AI because it's just looking at the pixels that it's been fed and reproducing them. It doesn't have a context as to why it works. You know, the beings on that right-hand side do have a likeness to a Norman Rockwell image, but they're horrifying. Now, that's a slightly older image, but it still makes the case and point that someone's trying to make Norman Rockwell-style illustration, and the problem is not that it doesn't look like it, it's that it doesn't communicate the same thing. So, how do we prompt AI? In all cases, you should be hyper-specific. You want to give as much information as you can to the AI tool. And whilst you're putting that information, it may sound or look like the AI is thinking, but it's not. It really needs guide rails to constrain the output you get out of it. So the dataset for most of these LLMs, the large language models, they're so huge and always growing because they always get fed into as more information becomes available on the internet. You need to narrow that focus like a funnel, because if you just say, give me ideas for making pizza, it's got so much information on pizza, it just doesn't know what to do with that. You need to be very, very specific. A good example of this is if you think about a floodlight for a football pitch compared to a laser. They're both forms of light, but the laser is that hyper-specific, hyper-refined, and we want that laser output. We need it to be very, very guided and direct. So here's a few ways that you can better prompt AI, essentially. So ask the tool itself to improve your prompt. So in this case, maybe we're going to say, create a range of ideas for naming a marketing business. But actually, once you've got some feedback from it, you use the meta approach. You're asking the AI itself, well, can you help me refine this prompt to get more out of it? You can have those conversational tools because it's written and designed to mimic human language and understand human language. That's why it's a large language model. So you could say something like, well, help me improve the previous prompt to get a more refined outcome based on your best working practice guidelines. Now, this isn't a fail-safe method, but it's quite a low-skilled approach. If you've got a little bit of time, but you want to get something quite powerful out of it, this is a good way to do it. Just ask how to improve the prompt from the tool itself. Another way to do this is to create an agent. So this is a relatively new bit of software within AI tools, very common in Microsoft's Copilot. And you can create an agent that helps with very specific things, and they have nuance and memory. So this agent is like a sort of fork off the existing AI tool that is created just for you. And it will remember the things you've had conversations about before. Now, this can become a bit tricky because people have become attached to agents very quickly. This is how AI boyfriends and girlfriends exist and all of those problematic things. But this can be really useful if you're going to have layers and layers of context. Let's say you've got lots of data to analyze. You can create an agent specifically just for that. And every time you ask it to read through a file, it will remember the ways that it deconstructed the data, 10 weeks ago, and it'll do that same process again for you. So that's a really good way, and it's all conversation based. So if you're going to be repeating a lot of tasks, it's worthwhile making an agent to do that. You can use a prompt generator or a database. There's huge amounts of them out there, and these are databases of existing prompts that people have written and found good outcomes for. A lot of them work on this sort of freemium model, which is you can get a couple for free and then you have to pay for more, which I think is a bit, well, it's very ironic, because AI is taking all this data completely free of charge, ripping it away from the rights holders and just spitting it back out to people. So the idea that you'd have to pay to prompt something that didn't pay for its source data is horribly funny, but terrible for us all. But if you are interested in this, there's some really good ones. So Anthropic, who make Claude, they've got a really good prompt library that you can use straight in their native tool. Prompt Hackers and the Prompt Index, these are two on that freemium model. And if you are someone that uses the internet a lot, if you know how to use GitHub or Reddit, there's loads and loads of resources on there as well, because that's where a lot of the sort of tech-savvy users will be putting information. Especially if you follow the prompt keyword, you'll find a lot about it. The other thing you can do is you can start to provide a framework. So the framework is about those guide rails I was talking about. It gives a space for the AI to understand how to operate. Now, a lot of these have quite strange acronyms: RTF, Race, Care, Ape, Craft, Create. They're all sort of backronyms. They've been created to sort of simplify the process into something we would understand. But one of the key things you're doing here is essentially what most people do with a creative process. You're asking the who, what, when, why, where, and how. That's kind of it. You can always break it down into that. You're always giving context. And breaking it down into a framework allows you to essentially break those bits of context down into lots of different compartments. So if that's something you're interested in, have a look at that. It's a way of, if your mind works like that, if you need to break down projects into different sections, a framework might be the best way for you to prompt an AI. So here's a really good example of this. So Deval, I think is probably how you pronounce it. Their surname looks very Dutch. This is Asana. This is an online tool. That AI program manager talks about the 4-sentence framework, and that's persona, goal, task, and context. So you can see it's following a very similar prompt to what we were talking about here. And this persona one is a really key one that we're seeing in the industry at the moment. You are an expert at. So if I was doing it as a graphic designer, I'd say, you're an expert at graphic design. You're Alan Fletcher. Tell me how to approach this. Now, the AI isn't actually Alan Fletcher, but it will find information around Alan Fletcher. It will look at information from, talks he's done or perhaps interviews, and it would embody that character. This is something that's very, very popular at the moment. So if you're looking for a framework and you don't know where to start, this is what I'd recommend for you. Now, this can be found from the links provided with this lecture, or you can literally screenshot this page and work from there. So it's also worth knowing, yes, AI is really powerful, but what are the pitfalls? What are the problems that we see people often falling into? And people refer to AI lying. But because it's not conscious, it's not really accurate to say that it lies, because it doesn't know it's lying. It's got an awareness of its own language enough to purposefully tell the truth nor lie. It's instead doing what people refer to as a hallucination. It's generating false information because it's always just guessing from the data set it has. It's got all this data, you've asked a prompt, and it's just guessing based on that. And a second pitfall is the data that AI is trained on is essentially human, and it doesn't have the facility to understand where poisonous information might come from that. So you get fabrication, bigotry, racism, and somewhat hilariously, sarcasm. It really doesn't do well with sarcasm. So something we saw recently here in Figure 6 is Google introduced an AI into their search function to give you an AI overview. And one of these hilarious ones was someone put cheese not sticking to pizza. And it's clear that they've scraped data from Reddit, which is full of people being very, very sarcastic. And it's clear that this user on the right-hand side with a slightly not safe for work name had said, oh, put a bit of Elmer's glue in with the cheese. Now, as a human, it's pretty obvious this is sarcasm, and Reddit is kind of a place where that kind of humour breeds. But the AI doesn't understand that, so it was directly suggesting that an average user, without any context of that sarcasm or where it come from, should just put 1/8 of a cup of non-toxic glue to help give the cheese more tackiness. So it's worth considering how much we trust the information it's based on, and always going back to double check, because that pitfall is quite a big one, especially if this is your first time trying to put cheese on a pizza. Maybe you're a 6-year-old. You might think that the glue is actually the right way forwards. So not only are there pitfalls, there's also legal concerns and plagiarism. So these huge data sets that modern AI tools are used on or have been trained on were just scraped right off the internet without any permission. So there's huge problems with where has this data come from and whose data is it. Now, it's such a big mess of other person's data all mixed together. There's no one obvious place where it comes from until it trips up and recreates something too perfectly, then it's obvious. This scraped data set also has problems with accidental plagiarism and removes your ability to copyright anything, because it's not made by you, it's made by a system of information just slamming things together. It's like, if you can imagine it like an Excel table. In every column of the Excel table, it's got loads and loads of information, and it's just grabbing 2 tables and slamming them together and saying, here's your answer. You couldn't possibly say that was your work, because it's just grabbing 2 things that it thinks are connected and puts them together for you. Now, as this technology is growing at a pace more rapid than our governments, there's always going to be grey areas around what's legal and what's not, and who owns the information that it relies upon. There's hope that this will start to be understood in the law, and there'll be some restrictions placed on, and it will start to get a bit easier to navigate. But as it stands, you shouldn't assume that anything you produce with an AI tool is inherently yours, because you haven't actually made it yourself. You've only asked for it. It's like asking a librarian for a book and assuming that book is now your copyright. Not really the case, is it? So, brilliant comic from Tom Gold, if anyone's aware of his work already. And it's talking about here the reason why a lot of creatives, professionals, academics are skeptical about AI at best is that the things they do are often things they love to do. Why would they want to make it easier for themselves just because it's a profitable benefit for somebody else? This person in this comic loves writing, so why would they want an AI to write stuff for them? But this constant tech movement of everything having AI put in it is almost forcing you to reduce your process, reduce your output, change your creative practice to be less good and more automated, because in the end, for tech companies, for a lot of businesses, doing things faster are more profitable, and it's not about that human production. So how would you implement it in your work and your research? So implementing any of these tools within your work and research, it's always best to consider about how suitable it is. Why would you be using it? What's the purpose of it? So if you're repeating a lot of tasks and the outcome doesn't require personal ownership, then it's probably quite suitable to apply AI to that process. But if you need, well, let's say you need to analyze large volumes of data. We've already spoken about that a little bit. AI is a great thing for that. Put a huge file in there and say, what's the median outcome of all of this? Or what appears most often? Or what could you take away from this document? Fantastic for that. Huge contract from a company. Give me the top points. Brilliant. But if you need to finish a writing with a personal perspective on an academic topic, so let's say a dissertation, a literature review, AI is not the right tool for that, because it's just guessing. It doesn't have that knowledge. You need to find those resources and get that from your own point of view. You can have conversations with it about stuff, but it's not an informed human. It's not an expert. It's just guessing from data sets it has. So you have to think about how suitable AI is for your work and where you want to implement it. So another really important thing here is disclosure and citation. So at present, there isn't a way to formally or officially cite AI transcripts. There isn't. The existing formats that we have are based on books and websites and videos. AI is quite new to this space, so there isn't an easy way to do it. Newcastle Uni offer the idea that you can use it within the format of personal communication or correspondence, but even that is a little bit grey area. So they suggest using something called ShareGPT, which will grab your whole transcript and turn it into something that you could reference back to, because you wouldn't really reference a conversation that you hadn't recorded with somebody in a pub to use in your dissertation. So it seems just as wild that you would reference a conversation that there's no oversight on, no way to reference or check. So it's difficult. But the one thing you want to do here is you always want to be transparent about this. You want to be able to disclose that you have used it and the purposes you've used it for. Because if you start to use it to write things for you and you're just putting them straight in your essay, it's not your work, and there's going to be a problem there. You could get essays cancelled, or research could be invalidated because you don't know the truth of what it's providing to you. It's not an expert, it's not a person, it hasn't done this research, it's just making that guess as I'm repeating. So some examples of how to be effective with applying AI in academia, and that could be academia or your creative practice as a student. There's not loads out there. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to show my own experience with it. So whilst I was doing my master's degree, I was looking to develop an EULA, which is an end user license agreement. And this is how fonts are licensed throughout the world. When someone buys a font from you, they sign an EULA, digitally at least, and that agrees that they'll not distribute it beyond their purchase point, so that you can keep the rights to your digital file. And I spoke to some lawyers that were in the space of digital tech and rights, and they told me that it would cost £330 an hour for their time. And I was like, flipping heck, I don't have the money for that. So I was like, okay, so I'm really sorry, I do not have the money for that. I'll try and find a different solution. And they suggested try ChatGPT. So I thought, okay, I'll try these AI tools and see what I can do with it. So I started on this process. So I had a look around and I found Google's Notebook LM standing for language model, and they're based on the Gemini platform, and it's a research tool. It's directly designed for research. So I gave it a sample of 10 pre-existing publicly available EULAs from various different type companies out in the world, and I basically was like, okay, cool, use this information and give me a first draft. Because I didn't know how to write in legal speak. I didn't have the time to read through them all and sample the bits I wanted. I was quite pressed up with my time in my final major project of my MA that I didn't have the ability to do all of that. This was a fantastic way of doing this. It produced me a really good first draft, which I looked at and was like, okay, this all looks right, but I need to check it. So I did what any suitable young person does. I don't know if I could describe myself as young anymore, but I was younger than I am now, I guess. I spoke to my father, who worked with contracts for a long time in civil engineering. So he gave it a good cast over it, and we went through lots of drafts together, double checking back through Notebook LM to say, are there any areas of this that you think would be legally difficult? What about this? What about that? That's what was a fantastic use for in this case study. So here's a screenshot of it. This is figure 8. And you can see on the left-hand side, there's 5 sources available. And I had further ones in the notes, but it doesn't display the chat as easily. So this in itself is one of those things where it's hard to reference back to. I made lots of detailed screenshots and notes and copied stuff out as I was going through it and documented that in my MA journal. But coming back to it now, it is a little bit difficult to show where all this different stuff is coming from. But you can see here, there's at least 5 on the left-hand side, and it started to take that information and it's breaking it down to tell you about what an EULA is. So for anyone using research that's going to have specific sources, this would be a fantastic tool to use. So the most vital part of this case study and the application of AI within it was that it was just a step in the process, not the entirety of the process. And that's because I approached this with a zero trust approach. I was always double checking and making sure the information it was providing me was correct. I was never just looking at it and thinking, yep, that's right, tick, job done. I think as soon as we start to do those things, as soon as we just assume that AI has given us the right answer because it's powerful, it starts to break down. We start to become essentially less smart, less clever. We're not checking our work. We're just saying, yep, that's correct because it's powerful. I've put a lovely little quote on the bottom there. You wouldn't plug your phone into an atomic bomb. Sure, they both have power, but I don't think you need that much power to charge your phone. In the same way, you don't need all this power for an AI to write an essay. What you actually need is good references and taking the time to understand the topic you're writing about. So, I'll summarize here. I'm sure I've taken enough of your time about this. And these are the final statements. So the first one is think about how suitable the integration of AI is within your research and practice before including it. I think that's the most important one. Think about suitability. Why are you using it? Are you using it just to speed things up? Are you using it because you don't understand the subject? In both cases, it's like, well, could you actually understand the subject more before using it? Could you get something out of the library? Do you need AI, or is this just a slightly lazy approach to this process? Use thoughtful prompts and framework to increase the quality of your interaction. The more you put in it, the more you'll get out. That's the same with everything else in life. What you put in, you get out. same with AI. Just make sure that if you're just asking a very open-ended question, you're going to get a very wide response. You want that hyper-specific. Think about it as a funnel or a laser. You really need to think about what you're putting into it to get out what you want to get out. Understand that AI is not thinking nor conscious. Even though it might write like that, it's not. It's just guessing at the information through searching through an enormous data set. Approach the information with a zero trust methodology, so trust nothing and check everything. And make sure it's only a step within your process. It's not the entirety of the process. Use the software with transparency and develop upon its output. So this is about disclosure. This is about make sure that when you have used it, you've clearly flagged that you've used it. Because if ever it provides you work and it's assumed that is your own work, there starts to be a legal problem there. And the true value in any work is you. You know, we were talking about how endless creatives throughout the ages of time have created fantastic work, not only without AI, but without computers. And the value there was them and their insight in it. Everybody could search the same prompt as you in AI and get the same repeated stuff. But when you're creating a project, the important thing about it is your perspective on it. And that's what you should be always pushing for in your practice and your research. And lastly, all of this might be out of date by the end of the year. This is being recorded in the middle of 2025. AI is still going through rapid development, so this could all change instantly. So thank you very much for watching this. If you have any further questions, please contact me at my university email. This will be provided with a range of resources and places that you can go to find some of the things I was talking about in this. I'd love to hear if you do have any successful use of AI within your academic practice, within your research. Yes, thank you very much.